Hello, everybody. Welcome to Monday. Yes, I am being cheeky with my shirt. Slytherins are very maligned in the Harry Potter books, so I felt I saw it and I grabbed it. Then I'm like, no, that's wrong for this particular thing. Are you having hairball, Delilah? You okay? Okay. But then I'm like, no, Slytherin's got nothing but maligned in the book, so I'm gonna do it. But yeah, I am talking about the J.K. Rowling thing. Let me do the Patreon thing before I get into it because this is messy. So that's part of the reason I thought it was important to talk about. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. YouTube will not demonetize this video because I'm criticizing a person. YouTube embodies the great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people. Social media is full of small minds in their entire format. But I do think it's important because I was cheeky in my response to J.K. Rowling at first. I'm going to unpack it further in this video just for people on all sides of this who want to kind of know what might be going on under the scenes. I'm going to offer that as well because you guys know I don't make videos just to dunk on people. So the tweet that started it all was J.K. Rowling shared a Devex.com article, which probably wouldn't get very many people reading it had she not called it out. So nobody's happier than Devex.com right now. But she says, people who menstruate. I'm sure there used to be a word for these people. Someone help me out. Wumban, wimpund, wumud, and then an opinion, creating a more equal post-COVID world for people who menstruate. Now, the first issue with her complaint here is if you read the article, it's specifically about menstruation stigma, which is something a lot of people don't know about. So I'll forgive her for not knowing very much about it, but I wish people in her place would sometimes listen more and talk less. Because if, the article actually refers to women and girls specifically, they reference gendered in the second paragraph right here. Advocates are calling attention to many gendered aspects of the pandemic. But then in the third paragraph, they define what they're saying. An estimated 1.8 billion girls, women, and gender non-binary persons menstruate. So this article, the headline on it, on a very wonky website, like of all the places to call out, I don't know why J.K. Rowling picked this one. But to call out an article that is about menstruation for referring specifically to people who menstruate, I guess she wants it to say creating a more equal post-COVID-19 world for women on their periods or whatever. Hi, Zelda. Bye, Zelda. But that's not what the article's actually about. The article's about anybody who menstruates, and they decided to be inclusive. And some, they specifically said gender non-binary people. They didn't even say trans men. They said, again, an estimated 1.8 billion girls, women, and gender non-binary persons menstruate. So, and I invite you to read this article. I'll link it in the bottom. It's dry, and I've read better articles on menstruation taboos. And there's a really good documentary out there that I happened to catch on BBC World about menstruation taboos in Nepal. But, this particular issue is not about domestic violence. It's not about, any of that stuff. It's specifically about access to maxi pads and tampons and things like that. The things that you need when you're on your period. So I don't know why she decided to pick this particular fight. And maybe I'm being too literal about this. Maybe there's something on the side of people who are more firm in their gender identity than I am. I have little to no attachment to the idea of myself as female. So maybe I can't relate to this, but I just don't get why, of all the fights to pick, she chose this one. Now, when everyone is already uptight and angry. I guess she doesn't care, and that's fair. But she didn't stop there. And it's the rest of her Twitter stuff that makes me puzzled. And unfortunately it's upside down, so I'm gonna have to go like from top to bottom, and I'll kind of do my best with this. Of course she continues. I can't read the tweet that she's referring to here, but I've spent much of the last 3 years reading books, blogs, and scientific papers by trans people, medics, and gender specialists. I know exactly what the distinction is. Never assume that because someone thinks differently, they have no knowledge. This is accurate, but I don't know what she's referring to because the tweet is unavailable. And I'm giving you all this just to make it abundantly clear. I am not cherry picking to make a point here. I want you to see the entirety of what she said. And then one of my best mates just called me self-described butch lesbian. It was hard to tell because she was shouting quite loudly, but I could just make out fucking yes in response to, please talk to some queer people, please. Now, should a woman who's best known for children's literature be swearing that way on social media? That's a question for another time, but I'm not, at this point, I'm like, what does a lesbian woman have to do with non-binary people? Because we're not even talking about trans people here. We're talking about non-binary people here. And then somebody said, takes one TERF to know another, I guess. And she says, feminazi, TERF, bitch, witch, times change, woman hate is eternal. And I was like, whoa, the term TERF is not about hating all women. The term TERF refers to a very specific thing. It stands for trans exclusive radical feminist. And the definition of it fits J.K. Rowling. She believed trans people deserve rights, but she does not consider trans people women based on the statement she is making. And, if that's your politics, own it. But, it's this typical thing of somebody who would rather deal with the emotional impact of a term than stopping and considering whether the term actually does accurately reflect their views. And it's hard to make an argument that it doesn't based on what she says going forward. This was the one that I kind of was like, where does this come from? If sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth. The idea that women like me, who've been empathic to trans people for decades, feeling kinship because they're vulnerable in the same way as women, trans people, not women. Do you see where I'm going here? It's not trans women are women. It's trans people aren't women, based on the way she structured the sentence, i.e. to male violence. Oh, okay. It's okay to make men the enemy. Like, men are a common enemy, but okay. Already we have sex is real. Okay. And women are women. Men commit violence, and trans people are, if sex is real, J.K. Rowling, and trans people therefore have to belong to a sex, what are trans women? They're women. Unless you want to claim they're men, in which case that is considered transphobic. Under J.K. Rowling's seemingly binary definition of sex, you only get two choices. Again, I don't agree. I believe in 5 genders. And I have evidence to back that up. Now's not the time. So moving on. Male violence. We're making men the common enemy. Awesome. Feeling kinship because they're vulnerable. Okay, let's chuck out the compound sentence. The idea that women like me hate, quote, trans people because they think sex is real and has lived consequences is nonsense. Again, I don't see anybody saying that she hates trans people because she thinks sex is real. It's that she's not referring to trans women as women. And the article didn't even reference trans women, so moving on. She called it nonsense. Okay. I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them. I'd march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans. At the same time, my life has been shaped by being female. I do not believe it's hateful to say so. Okay, J.K. Rowling, there have been opportunities for you to march with people to support them being trans. Have you done it? If you haven't, there have been opportunities. There has been plenty of trans discrimination, so I'm sorry. I have to call BS on that one. You're too busy writing other books and making gobs and gods of money about from Harry Potter movies and theme parks now. You're not marching in no rallies, and you know what? That's fine. But there is this constant reference to the fact that trans women aren't women in her statements. That is the issue that people have, and that is why people have labeled her a TERF. Now you'll notice I say people. I am not prepared to quite go there yet because I think I get what she's getting at. She's just phrasing it very badly. I'm in this sort of nowhere land right now. I can't prove she's a TERF, but I can't deny that there is a lot of evidence in that direction. So I'm non-binary on the J.K. Rowling TERF issue. But then we see what's cutting to the root of her outrage. Okay. Some guy says, J.K. Rowling is pinpointed why so many gay peeps are concerned about this new version of trans activism. We used to be comrades in arms with our trans mates until some extremists insisted that biological sex was an illusion. Our legal protections and our identifiers are based on it. Okay, but they're extremists. So why are you giving the narrative over to the extremists? Just don't focus on what the extremists say. Focus on the common ground. Because when you're defining the entire sort of not just experience, but philosophy of trans identity based only on people you self-label extremists, you are giving them the narrative. It is the problem that happened with late second wave and third wave feminism, what I call the dork side. That is what happened. They gave the narrative over to the extremists, and you weren't a real feminist unless you were crazy extremists, like Andrea Dworkin, who also claimed she was lesbian without ever actually being in a relationship with a woman. But that's neither here nor there. And so now we have another article. She's hitting that emotional marker, right? I have never felt as shouted down, ignored, and targeted as a lesbian within our supposed GLBT community as I have over the past couple years. This is not her saying it. Is actually from the article. And it is an article. It's interesting. It's an interesting point of view about how lesbians have fallen through the cracks of gay identity and LGBTQ plus activism of late. And there's a place to talk about that. But, I'm not seeing anything to show that J.K. Rowling is not a trans-exclusive radical feminist. Her statements make it pretty clear that I respect y'all, but y'all not women. That is the definition of a TERF. That It's our rights. It's women's rights. And you complicate this through your very existence. So you're just not women because that's inconvenient to me. That's pretty much a TERF. And I'm not seeing anything against that. If she had referred to trans women as women once, different story. But I have found an ongoing thing with people who have unrecognized transphobia. They just have this issue of referring to trans women as women. And again, trans people are not the same as non-binary people. Trans people transition from the gender they were assigned to the gender that is correct for them based on their intrinsic identity, what their brain on a chemical level is telling them they are. They have mapped which part of the brain actually houses gender identity, and I forget it this time. I've been told a million times, and it doesn't embed. Maybe that has something to do with my lack of a firm gender identity. I don't know. And yeah, I understand how hilarious it is that somebody can have boobs as big as mine and not intrinsically feel female. That's the fun of this identity stuff, folks. You know, I have found it an ongoing thing that people who just have this, first of all, they confuse trans people and non-binary. That's where I was at. Okay, getting back on track. Trans people transition, okay? They affirm the gender, and it's almost a misnomer, right? Because it makes it sound, and I got into it with a guy on social media today who was beating up on a trans woman pretty hard because he didn't understand this. You know, the whole idea of it's not that somebody was a man this whole time and then they become a woman. No. It's that it's the same way a person can't turn gay. They were always gay. Even if they were trying really hard not to be gay, even if they were in denial of the fact that they're gay, they were always gay. They were gay from birth. That is not something you can choose to be. Same thing, you can't choose to be straight. Gender is the same thing. No matter what your external anatomy may signal, and in some cases, people have had sex reassignment at birth because they had signifiers of both, anatomy of both, and they thought, oh, it's better to normalize it. That was a policy that continues to be the policy for the most part up until very recently. But let's just stick with people who were not in that situation. Just for the minority of cases, the gender identity in their brains and the anatomical sex don't match. That is the reality of trans people. And so they make their bodies match their brains because sex is very real. If it wasn't real, people wouldn't go through all that trouble to affirm their gender, to affirm their sex. Unfortunately, we change. I make this, back in my day in the 90s, we treated gender and sex as different things. It makes more sense to me, but I'm trying here. But the point is, trans people do not claim that biological sex isn't real. People don't claim that the idea of there being, validity to the identity, that's real. The issue is, what is the origin point of being? What is the origin point of what it means to be a woman? Is it defined by the body, or does it start with consciousness? And this is something we have to be very careful with. Because if we start defining womanhood by things like having a period, having children, having ovaries, what happens if a woman can't have children? What happens if a woman needs a hysterectomy? Do these anatomical things mean she's not a woman anymore? If she needs a mastectomy, is she less of a woman? Now we'd say, of course not. Aha! So why is it any different for trans people? Why is it any different for trans women? Why isn't a trans woman a woman when their consciousness is female? They feel female. If a woman who's had a mastectomy, a woman who's had a hysterectomy is no less female than a trans woman is no less female, because sexual identity, gender identity is not about the body. It's about the brain. It's about the mind. And this is where we get people saying that, oh, that means it's a mental illness and it's the only mental illness that we make the body match the brain. I don't believe it's a mental illness. I think it's actually something on a physiological level. And then we get into, well, if the physiology doesn't necessarily match the anatomy, which one's right? That's a physical thing versus a physical thing. Now, none of this debate claims sex isn't real. Again, if sex wasn't real, then trans people wouldn't go through all of that to make their bodies match their brains. Gender identity is incredibly real, right? Looking the way your brain says you should look is incredibly real. So this whole argument that J.K. Rowling is bringing forward, that the existence of trans people, that trans people wanting to be validated as male or female, based on their identities, the idea that somehow means sex isn't real, she's got it backwards. And she's confusing non-binary people who come at it from a very different place than trans people do. And to me, non-binary people, they're not claiming womanhood. So that's not a problem, right? It's not like non-binary people are going to come in and usurp women. They're not claiming to be women. They're third option, neither, decline to answer. And it could be that they're just not, they haven't quite figured it out yet. It could be they never figure it out. But there's no assault on the feminine identity. There is no invalidation of the feminine experience by somebody who doesn't identify as female. So on either plank, her thinking is just wrong. And that's why I felt the need to do this emotional dive into why she would decide to wade into this really thorny issue. And I realize it's the same reason I do. I have trans men and women in my life. More trans men than women. I'm not sure why. But, their identity is very, very important to them. They feel very strongly that they are men. They are women. And they want to be recognized as such. Now, thing is, Harry Potter gave a lot of them a big boost to the legitimacy of their identity because of polyjuice potions where people can look any way they want. Just with, you put, a hair in a drink and it tastes kind of gross, but poof, their problem solved. It was like wish fulfillment for non-cisgendered people. Then she has the very thorny issue of patronuses or patroni. I'm not sure what the correct plural is, but one of the big reveals in Harry Potter, spoiler alert if you've been living under a rock, is that Severus Snape's Patronus is a doe. And this was supposed to prove he was in love with Lily, what was her first name? Evans, eventually Potter, Harry Potter's mom. The problem with this, is that the guy who married Harry's mom, James Potter, his Patronus was a stag. Masculine of deer. Same as Harry's. Masculine, right? So you got Snape here, who, it would make sense if James is in love with Lily and that means his Patronus is a stag. Then if Snape is in love with Lily, then his Patronus is a Should be stag, but it's not. And all of a sudden, you get all these very valid theories of, whoa, dude is definitely part of the, if he is a dude, part of the, LGBTQ plus rainbow there. The embodiment of his inner hopes and dreams is female, and you kind of get the sense of maybe he was in love with her as a bestie, not so much romantic in the same way. But she put that in a book. And she gave people hope in that regard, that sort of thing was valid. And now she is, and I don't think she's realizing she's doing this, stomping on the hope that her work gave people. And, this is why some people subscribe to death of the author, that author intent is subverted by what's actually on the page. I don't necessarily agree with that. There's also a whole lot of the fact that J.K. Rowling borrowed from a lot of pre-existing sources, so she may not have entirely realized the messages she was sending. But it does make the whole thing a more tender issue for fans of the Potter books to see her taking a very clear side, for lack of a better term, with this. And this is why I wanted to examine this. Now let's take a bit of time to talk about this idea that some women feel like their hard-fought rights due to biological realities are somehow under threat from the idea that gender is fluid, which is not the same as saying it's not real. If there's a spectrum, it's a real spectrum. Doesn't mean that spectrum's not real. It just means it's not binary. And that's not the same. And so I don't know how to get somebody like J.K. Rowling, who is clearly coming from a place of real trauma, either because of her or friends of hers. I suspect it's personal to an extent. But I don't know how to get through to somebody like that gender not being an on-off switch, that it's a continuum of experience, doesn't make it any less real. Just because multiple colors blend together to make white light, that doesn't mean the white light or those colors aren't real. Like, her supposition is that if something is not simple, it is not real, and that is not so. The truth is, for the vast majority of people, they are cisgender. Their brains and their bodies match. And yeah, women have been through some shit based on all that stuff. Now, one will note, she assumed a not obviously female pen name. It wasn't, Joanne Rowling? It was J.K., right? And a lot of female authors do this because of the perception that men won't read books written by women. More to the point, boys won't read books written by women. And I have been told this by other authors who do the same thing. They are inspired by J.M. Barrie, and so they just use their initials, so people can't tell if it's a woman or not until later, and then, oh, wow. This is an ongoing thing in publishing, that people insist that boys won't read books about girls, boys won't read books written by women, this sort of thing. So maybe there's some bitterness there. I don't want to completely invalidate her the way she's invalidated other people, but she's read a lot, apparently. She's done a lot of research, God knows how cherry-picked, and she's clearly got some people around her perpetuating this view. The problem is her fundamental assertion that there's anything wrong with being more inclusive in terms of the term menstruation. and or the fact that sex is not, or gender is not binary, whatever you want to call it, means sex and gender aren't real. These are just categorically false assertions that mean start to finish her logic is flawed. And I just want people from all points of view to see how one can disagree with her without labeling her evil. Because you know what? As frustrating as she's being right now, that doesn't solve anything. It would be better if she could learn and actually understand the impact of her words. We'll see. Perhaps she's too arrogant and too surrounded by people who are just too wounded to understand that. And it's too bad, because there's a valid point at the core of all of it, which is a trans woman is not fungible with a cis woman the same way any other subtype of woman is not interchangeable with another subtype of woman. You can't say a black woman is exactly the same as a white woman. You can't say a Latina is exactly the same as an Asian woman, right? You know, like there's a different layer of experience. Inclusive, diverse communities make space for both, because it's not like there's a limited amount of space. And I think anybody in their right mind recognizes that the life experiences of a trans woman are not the same as the life experiences of a cis woman, cisgender woman, for people who aren't sure what I'm talking about. But the life experience of a woman in North America is not the same as the experience of a woman in sub-Saharan Africa. These things are obvious. It does not negate the validity of the overall female experience. It is not taking anything away from anybody pre-existing to diversify what we think of as female. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.